Are we ready?
Ready.
Yep.
Alright guys, so here is your video of the skull. So I'm going to go through it pretty slow. I'm also going to need a fetal skull. Is there any over there? No, not so much. Alright, well we'll do the fetal skull in a minute. We'll do the adult for now. So for now, let's just go through the bones of the skull of the adult. Oh, never mind. Here we go. Here's our fetal skull. On the fetal skull, I could label some bones, some major bones. Frontal bones would be here and here. Parietal bones would be here and here. Occipital bone is going to be here. And then temporal bone is going to be this little piece here, and also over here. On the fetal skull, what we're definitely going to label is going to be the fontanelle. So there's 4 you need to know. The anterior fontanelle is going to be this soft spot here, anterior fontanelle. Posterior fontanelle is here. You have a couple of ones over here. You have the sphenoidal, which is going to be right here, and then you have the mastoid fontanelle, which is going to be right there. And that's it for a fetal skull. Also, like things like the mandible, which is the lower jaw, the maxilla, which is the upper jaw. But usually everything else will label on an adult skull. So here's our adult skull. Again, we got the major bones. So this is going to be your frontal bone, which is your forehead. You spin it to the side. You have a temporal bone. You got one on this side and also the same thing on the other side. Temporal bone is here. You have a parietal bone here and a parietal bone right here. And then in the back, on the bottom, you got the occipital bone, which is this whole region right here. Separating your big flat bones, you have these things that look like stitches called sutures. So you have the sagittal suture that goes down the center. You have a lambdoidal suture that goes across the back, separating your parietal bones from your occipital bone. You have a coronal suture, which is here, goes all the way across where you have a crown on, separating your frontal bone from your parietal bone. Then you have a squamosal suture here, which is going to separate your temporal bone from your parietal bone, your frontal bones, and also your occipital bones. And that's it for sutures. If we open the skull up on the inside, if we divide our skull, hang on, the little label's still stuck in there.
I can smart better.
Okay. If we label, or if we break our skull basically into 3 different regions, I can put my fist in one region here. You can see there's a little cup here and here, and then there's also a flat region up here. These are going to be called fossa. So this flat spot up here is going to be your anterior fossa. These 2 little cups here and here are going to be your middle fossa, and then the one in the back where I got my fist is going to be the posterior fossa. They basically just hold the different parts of the brain: occipital lobes, temporal lobes, and frontal lobes, which will go up there. We already did the frontal bones, parietal bones. If you look inside of your sutures, some skulls will have it, some skulls will not. And this is, of course, a broken skull that doesn't go together, so let's just take our time. Put it back together. Hopefully, nice enough where I can hold it. Okay. So if we look inside if we can do this, come on. If you look inside the actual sutures, sometimes you're going to see little fragments of bones that are completely surrounded by a suture line. So you can see where my thumb is right here. You can see there's this little kind of fragment of a bone inside of the suture. One right there, and one right there. Those are going to be your Wormian bones. There's also a big one right over here you can see here. So just little fragments of bones inside of sutures. Moving along, if we look just at the occipital bone, which again is this one back here, flip the skull upside down. This is all occipital bone right here. It's got a couple of things you need to know. So parts of the occipital bone. This hole is called the foramen magnum, and then here you have your occipital condyles. And what they do is these little occipital condyles are where your first vertebrae sits from your spinal cord and what your head basically just sits on when you're standing up. So those are your parts of your occipital bone. If we move to the ethmoid bone, so the ethmoid bone, you can see a little bit of it right here, and you can see more of it up here on the inside right here, and also inside of the nose here. So these are all parts of the ethmoid bone. So the flat part lining this ridge, this whole little flat bone, is going to be your cribriform plate. So this whole region here and here is going to be cribriform plate. These little tiny polka dots, these little holes, are going to be olfactory foramina. Little tiny holes. That's where your olfactory receptors are going to come through and join with your brain. And then this ridge right here, this little nub sticking up, is going to be your crista galli. Again, these are all parts of that ethmoid bone. And if we flip this way, if we look inside the nose, this central bone that's a nice flat plate is going to be your perpendicular plate, which, again, part of your ethmoid bone. Moving along, the sphenoid bone. From the inside of the skull, it looks like a big butterfly. So it's this region that goes all the way out like this. So it's this whole little chunk of butterfly in the center. It's got a bunch of different parts to it that we need to know. If we flip it over, actually look at it from the outside again, these 2 extensions that come up towards you are going to be the pterygoid processes, again, of the sphenoid bone being this whole middle part. So pterygoid processes are here. If you look in the eye, in the back of the eye, you can see there's a little hole sticking the pipe cleaner through it. It's where your little olfactory nerve will go through, and if we see it from this direction, we actually follow it through right here. This is going to be your optic foramen or optic canal. It's just going to be the hole in the bone that the optic nerve goes through. You have a couple of other holes you need to know, so this one I'm just going to leave in. This is going to be your optic in pink. Your foramen ovale, if you look at the holes, the one that's oval shaped right here, it's going to be your foramen ovale. Remember there's one here and one here. So we can stick it through just so you guys can see it from this direction and also be able to identify it from this direction. So it's going to be this guy right here and this guy right here, your foramen ovales on the outside of the skull. So we got 2 holes in, a couple more to go. Foramen rotundums. So rotundums on the skulls, it should be a hole that goes all the way through because it's foramen. But these ones actually don't. So you can see there's a little black dot right here. I should be able to take this pipe cleaner and stick it all the way through, but for some reason our skulls don't go all the way through. So here and here are going to be your foramen rotundums, and they should go all the way, again, through the skull, but they don't. So foramen rotundums are going to be right there. And then the last one we need to know is going to be the spinosum. So I'm going to grab our pink one. If we look right next to our foramen ovale in red, there's a little hole, oops, come here, right here, which I can stick this pipe cleaner into. That's going to be your foramen spinosum. So foramen spinosum is here. And you can see it from the other side of the skull. Again, you should be able to see it sticking out right there, that little nub. Get it right through there. Go in your home. There we go. So this is going to be your foramen spinosum, foramen ovale. Again, this is going to be your optic coming out the eye. And then the only other one you need to know is going to be the rotundum right here, as far as your lovely sphenoid bones are concerned. Other parts you need to know, this little saddle my finger's sticking in is going to be your sella turcica, and the back of the saddle is going to be the dorsum sellae, this little ridge right there. Moving along, another hole, last but not least, so we already found the rotundum, the ovale, and the spinosum. You can see there's another big hole right next to it, right here. That's going to be your foramen lacerum. So if you're sitting in your little saddle, your sella turcica, you put your feet through your foramen lacerums, here and here. That's the first page. Moving along. So now we're going to go to the temporal bone. Temporal bone, again, is this whole piece of bone right here. Use this squamosal suture as a barrier. So anything inside of that's going to be temporal bone. It's got a couple of different portions. The flat portion up here is going to be the squamosal portion. Coming down, there's a big nub. This is going to be your mastoid process with the mastoid portion around it. This hole here is going to be your external acoustic meatus. It should go all the way through and enter the skull because this is where your sound actually travels to hit your eardrum. And your eardrum is called the tympanic membrane, so this region around this hole is going to be the tympanic portion. So tympanic portion, mastoid portion, squamosal portion. And the only other part you need to know, if you look on the inside, still squamosal portion, but this ridge right here is going to be your petrous portion, going right along this guy. Flip the skull back over. So if we look at where our mandible attaches to our skull, right like that, we can see there's this little divot. See how it sits right in there? Little divot, where our little mandible sits, right there. This little divot is called the mandibular fossa. So you got one here and one here, mandibular fossa. We already did the external-acoustic meatus. A couple more things. Again, this is still your mastoid process. This little skinny needle-looking one, though, is going to be a styloid process. So it's a very skinny, needly, pointy piece of bone. A couple more holes. So we already found the ovale, the spinosum, the lacerum. But if you look here, there's a big, huge hole back here. You can see it through the foramen magnum. Big hole here. There's also a little perfect circle hole right here. This perfect circle hole, I got this little pipe cleaner in right now, is going to be your carotid canal, your carotid foramen. Whereas the one next to it, which is a big, kind of wide, gaping hole, is going to be your jugular foramen. That's it for that. This whole upper jaw, this whole piece basically is going to be the maxilla, or the maxillary bone. It's got a palatine process. So if we look inside your mouth, the roof of your mouth is called your palate. So this top part of your mouth right here is going to be your palatine process of your maxilla. Use this crack as a border. If you're talking about behind the crack, this has an actual separate name. This is called the palatine bone. So you got palatine bone here, but palatine process of a maxilla up here. Together they make the hard palate up here, top of your mouth. Moving along, your cheekbone. So this is your zygomatic bone right here. It's basically the pointy part of your cheekbone, attaches to your maxilla. Your nose, these little pieces of bone right here and here are going to be your nasal bones. And then when you cry because this class is terrible, because you just hate your life, this little bone right here is called the lacrimal bone. So lacrimal means tears. So this little hole in the middle is basically going to be your lacrimal foramen, which you don't need to know. But just this little bone that surrounds this little hole is going to be the lacrimal bone. What else? Inside the nose, we already said that this middle center bone right here, this nice straight one, is going to be the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid. But along the bottom, there's a ridge of bone right here that's called the vomer. So this is going to be your vomer bone. The vomer plus the palatine, or the perpendicular plate, are together make a septum for the nose. Also inside the nose, you can see there's these kind of crookedy, squirrely looking ridges of bones that stick out. These are going to be your nasal concha or nasal turbinates. You think of a turbine like a big swirling machine that spins something. These are the same idea. So these swirly looking bones, when the air goes into your nose, actually swirl the air around to humidify it, add water to it and warm it up, and also clean it so that it doesn't bring all that dusty, dirty air down into your lungs. The hyoid bone you have to see on Herbert. So just remember that's the one that when you get strangled to death, it's the one that gets broken. That's a nice happy thought for the day. And then last but not least, this is the mandible. A couple of parts you need to know on your mandible. Mandible is the lower jaw. You need to know the ramus, which is just this arm part of the mandible, this part of the bone that goes up. The mandibular notch, which is right here, and also the mandibular condyle, which is the region of the bone that actually kind of articulates or joins with the skull. And that is it for the skull.